Hey guys, this is a prototype version of the Crane K from Militiaworks. The Crane series is Militiaworks' new duty grade series of ARs, kind of a counterpart to the high-end Dissident series, but with a few more mil-spec features. I've got a bit of a backstory to tell you before we talk about this gun, and a disclaimer as well, so let's get into that first of all. A while back I did a review of the Militiaworks Joe carbine for TFB TV. I really liked that rifle, really liked the way that Dane, the proprietor of Militiaworks, designs and puts together his ARs. We got to talking after that review and he told me about his plans for the Crane series, and I said, hey, if you ever make a K version of that with an 11.5 barrel, I will be your first customer. So I think I was. I think I have the very first prototype version of the Crane K from Militiaworks. As for that disclaimer, I did buy this gun from Militiaworks with my own money, but I also spent a lot of time talking to Dane. We started playing video games together. I invited him out to Utah to do a shoot with Brassfax and I. We had a very good time, and I would now consider him to be a good friend. So I am no longer the most unbiased source of information about Militiaworks products. I still think they're well-designed and extremely well-made ARs, but take that with a pinch of salt because they are built by a friend of mine. That being said, we're going to take a look at the prototype version of the Crane K, talk about the ways this differs from the final production version, which should be available from Militiaworks either now or very soon, and then talk about how I have this set up, because I know everybody loves AR setup videos. Let's go for it. Well, since I got that disclaimer out of the way, we know this isn't a serious video, and that means there's no reason I can't have a beer while I do it. So what makes the Militiaworks Crane different from a Dissident? Basically, it's the integration of more duty grade or mil-spec components in the barrel and bolt carrier group. The Dissident uses a 9310 steel bolt, the Crane uses mil-spec Carpenter 158. Is C158 the best steel for an AR bolt? Well, it was in the 1960s. These days we have newer steels like 9310, which if properly heat treated, should be a little stronger. Some ARFCOM boomers don't trust 9310 steel. I don't really care either way, but getting a Carpenter 158 bolt head is never a bad idea. Instead of the Dissident's 4150 button-rifled barrels, the Crane series uses Black River Tactical cold hammer forged chrome-lined barrels. The BRT Optimum barrels have a modernized profile, kind of like the Ballistic Advantage Hansen profile. It reduces some weight over an old-school government barrel, but doesn't go too crazy with it. The last big-ticket feature on the Crane series is the Viltor A5 buffer system, which is a lengthened carbine buffer tube that uses rifle-length springs and a proprietary buffer weight. The extra length of travel versus a traditional carbine buffer allows you to get more mileage out of equivalent buffer weights with the A5. Basically, it'll shoot a little bit smoother. Some guys would describe it as shooting flatter, but flat shooting is a property of ballistics, not recoil. On to the Crane K and my prototype version of it. This one has the BRT Optimum 11.5-inch carbine gas barrel. The 11.5 BRT barrels are available in a suppressed version and a normal version. The suppressed version has a reduced gas port size to make the gun more pleasant and easier to tune when running exclusively suppressed. The Crane K has the normal version of the barrel, and it's already very well gassed for use with a can, so the suppressor version of the barrel would probably be a bad idea. We'll talk about tuning the gun a bit later. I have mine set up to run exclusively suppressed, and I'm still glad I don't have the suppressed barrel. The handguard on my Crane K is the Forward Controls Design 9.5-inch quad rail. This is a two-piece free-float rail. It's very similar to the Centurion free-float quad rail, because Centurion makes these for forward controls with a few minor changes to the design. It's still basically the same rail, but the FCD version has a slightly reprofiled front, and it doesn't have machined-in sling QD points like the Centurion. Forward Controls says they like to leave it up to the end user where to install the sling. I think that's kind of a bullshit excuse. The Centurion version of the rail has a forward and a rear sling QD point, basically the only two places you'd actually put a sling. The Centurion and Forward Control Designs quads are some of the best rails for use with night vision laser devices. The way a two-piece clamp-on free-float handguard bolts onto a mil-spec barrel nut allows it to take advantage of the huge amount of torque that the barrel nut is able to be installed with. It'll take an enormous amount of force to rotate or come loose. This design is way more resistant to rail shift over time than a friction-attached handguard. The downside is they're a lot more work to install, but that's why you're paying somebody else to build the gun for you. These quads are similar in design to the Midwest Industries two-piece clamp-on free float, but they do have a thinner profile that feels better in the hand, and I think the finishing work is nicer as well. The other advantage of this rail is added rigidity to prevent rail flex and the resultant zero shift with your laser devices. Quad rails tend to be more rigid than M-LOK rails because they're thicker and heavier, but there's no reason you couldn't add more material to an M-LOK rail to make it more rigid as well. Some rails, like my beloved discontinued ALG rails, or the ones made by Cross Machine and Tool, are a little bit on the heavier side, but they're much more rigid than the average M-LOK handguard. So what are the differences between my prototype Crane K and the final production version that will be available from Militiaworks fairly soon? You'll notice I talked about the Centurion quad rails and the cross machining tool M-Lock rails. That's what's known as foreshadowing. The production version of the Crane S and Crane K both use the cross machining tool HDM handguards. If you want to upgrade to a quad rail, you can pay a little bit more to get the Centurion quad rail. Both of those are good options. The CMT is very solid for an M-Lock rail, and the Centurion quad is probably a little better than the FCD in my opinion. The other big change is that the bolt carrier group on the final version of the Crane is chromed, not phosphate like the one in my gun. Militiaworks offers a bunch of configuration options, so small details like the ambi mag catch or furniture selection is up to you when you order. My lower is finished out with an ALG ACT trigger, forward controls design short throw ambi safety, forward controls design in big end trigger guard, and a standard Radian Raptor charging handle. The Crane is an expensive AR, but I don't think it's overpriced. It's a combination of high quality parts assembled extremely well. Dane from Militiaworks assembles ARs with his usual brand of extreme AR autism. Beefy stake jobs, receiver face lapping for proper barrel fit. The barrel is dimpled for the gas block set screws and cross-drilled for a pin, the usual. Militiaworks lowers have that right side bolt drop button, which I'm a big fan of, and they've also got a mil-spec fire control group pocket, if you know you know. I've built a lot of my own ARs before, and they've all been functional, but I'm not the most exacting by-the-book gunsmith, and I probably wouldn't want to waste components this nice on a rifle I built in my home office, on a tea towel on my lap. The Crane K is a long-term, turnkey AR for me. I can shoot the crap out of this thing without worrying about it. I don't have to be nice to it. I don't have to replace parts on it. If I ever manage to destroy this gun, I'll ship it back to Militiaworks under warranty to have it fixed.
Don't let this touch anything plastic for about the next hour. No.
Oh, you can smell it. It smells like burning can.
It does.
And yeah, I've been shooting this thing a lot. I initially ran it unsuppressed with just an A2 flash hider on Operation Green Skies with Brass Facts in Utah. The Crane behaved a lot like my 11.3 Hansen barrel AR did when unsuppressed. Perfectly functional with 5.56 ammunition, but with some failures to lock back on empty with brass case 223 ammo. And when I tried to run it unsuppressed with steel case, I would have regular failures to feed. Depending on who you talk to, this is either a sign of undergassing or a sign of proper gassing. Basically, it depends on if the person you're talking to owns a suppressor or not. These reliability issues were with the Viltor A5H0 buffer installed as the gun came from Militiaworks. That is equivalent in weight to an H1 buffer on a normal carbine buffer system. It probably would have been more reliable if I tossed it on a lower with a normal carbine buffer tube and a normal 3-ounce carbine buffer. Ultimately, I didn't care to tune the gun to run unsuppressed with shitty ammo, so I put the can on there and I've run it 100% suppressed since then. With the Viltor H equivalent buffer and the can, the gun went from being undergassed to being a tiny bit overgassed, which is unsurprising since the Trek 2 is an old school high back pressure can. I swapped the buffer out for Viltor's H1 or A5-1 buffer, which is equivalent in weight to an H2 buffer in a normal carbine system, and now the Crane K is immaculate. Even without a special gas-busting charging handle, there's very little gas to the face, it's incredibly soft shooting, and perfectly reliable with all the ammo I've thrown at it, including cheap steel case. This is why the BRT 11.5 suppressor barrel seems like a dicey proposition to me. Unless you are only going to run full power 5.56 ammo with a high back pressure can and you're unwilling to buffer up the system a little bit, it probably would be an unreliable setup. I used the Crane K as a test mule for a few different optics, but eventually settled on its current configuration. Alright, let's talk about setup. I have this gun configured to do everything, and the trade-off is weight. There is a lot of capability on this gun, and the end result is that it weighs in at exactly 10 pounds with an unloaded magazine configured as you see here. We didn't just tack on a bunch of useless weight for no reason. It's all very intentional, but it is still a little bit on the heavy side. Starting up at the front, the suppressor is a Gemtech Trek 2. It is a direct thread can. It is fairly heavy, weighs about 16 ounces, but because it is direct thread, there is no mount system or muzzle device, the end result being that the weight is pretty comparable to a lot of suppressor systems. Since we're using a direct thread suppressor, we are never going to shoot this thing unsuppressed, but that's not really a big deal. These barrels are extremely well gassed for use with full power ammunition and suppressors. We don't have an adjustable gas system, but we don't need it. We also have the Viltor A5 buffer system at the back. The buffer weight in here right now is the A5-1, which is equivalent in weight to a normal H2 buffer. This thing shoots extremely well, it is reliable with all types of ammunition, and it is not overgassed with full power loads, even without an adjustable gas block. That is the beauty of a properly gassed barrel. Obviously, we're going to want to use this thing with night vision, so we have the full complement of night vision accessories on there. A lot of guys are in the active aiming camp. A lot of guys are in the passive aiming camp. As a based radical centrist, I'm not in either camp. I like to have both systems on my guns, if at all possible. So, the laser device on here is a D-Ball i2 9007 PEC2. It has an IR laser designator and an IR illuminator. It is civilian powered, so it tops out in effectiveness at about 100 yards or so, but that's perfectly adequate. I don't know if you ever tried to take a shot much beyond 100 yards with night vision. It's really fucking difficult, even with a full power laser. We also have a Surefire 600 Scout Light with the Vampire head, the KM2C. We're not really using this for the IR flood illumination, although it's nice to have as an option. Mainly we want this so that we can safe the light, turn it to the off position, and it completely eliminates the possibility of a negligent white light discharge. Also, the white light performance of the Vampire heads is better than the white light performance of the Scout Light heads, even though the Scout Light heads theoretically produce a lot more lumens. These are just longer and they have a better reflector design. We're using a DS00 tail cap on here because it gives us redundant activation, push button on the cap, as well as a remote switch port. Both of these devices are controlled by the Surefire SRO7D-IT dual pad switch. I like these, they work really well, and they have nice soft momentary only buttons, not a lot of confusion there. This light is mounted on an Arisaka side scout mount for 1913. If we wanted to, we could use an offset mount to tuck the light in closer to the D-ball. However, the DS00 tail cap is so big that it would actually bump into the D-ball if we did that. So we'd have to move the light back, and then we'd get more suppressor shadow with the light. So this works perfectly fine. With other laser units, it would have to be a little bit of a different setup. That's just the way that it goes. Cable management is with LaRue index clips. These things are great, although I've complained before about how you got to buy a bag of 72 clips to get the 4 clips you're actually looking for, but whatever. On the bottom of the rail is a Magpul ladder. This isn't really for traction so much as it is for protection of the rail when you bash this thing against rocks or try to support off of something. I tried this with, CAG angled grips and stuff like that, and just never really found it to be all that comfortable. Also, when you try to stabilize off of something, if you have an angled grip or a vert grip or something, kind of forces you to sit a little bit higher than you want and makes you wobble a little bit more. Not a huge deal. I prefer just to keep it slick. There's plenty to hold on to with this quad rail, so that's not a big deal. Sling attachment points is one of the most frustrating things about quad rails. The Forward Control Designs version of the rail doesn't have QD points, so we're using a Blue Force Gear Picatinny sling adapter with a Blue Force Gear, I think this is the U-loop or the molded wire loop, and a T-Rex Arms 2-point quick adjust sling. The back of the sling is attached to the SBA4, not to the sling QD point on the end plate. I've never been a fan of attaching a sling back here. I think once you bring the gun back into your workspace to address a malfunction or to go for, sort of an administrative reload, you end up not being able to use the charging handle anymore because you've got sling going all over it. So that's just a personal preference. As for the optics, we have got an EOTech EXPS3-0. These are still the best choice for passive aiming with night vision, which is a capability I like to have. They also work great with the magnifier, which is a capability I also like to have. This sits at the lower 1/3, which is plenty high enough for me to use with passive aiming. Maybe that's not the case for you. I think this is perfectly fine. I prefer the lower mount anyway for all other types of shooting. Magnifier is an EOTech G33. This is a 3-power magnifier. It's still a pretty good magnifier, although it's getting a little bit long in the tooth. The thing I like about it mainly is that the body is long enough that it will clear my backup rear sight and still give me plenty of eye relief, although I do have to scrunch up on the gun a little bit. The backup sight works in conjunction with the Railscales leaf on the front of the D-ball to give us a backup sighting system, because I don't know if you've heard, but EOTechs don't have a very good battery life. And that's it. That is the whole setup. Despite the fact that we have all of these accessories on the gun and a quad rail, it still only weighs 10 pounds. You'll find a lot of guys out there who don't have this much capability on their gun and have somehow managed to get up into the 12, 13 pound range. So anyway, the Crane K is a phenomenal AR. I love the way this thing is set up. It does everything that I want to do, and it's extremely pleasant to shoot, very effective. And because I have restless AR syndrome, I'm probably going to completely change it up after this video. That's all I got for now, guys. Thank you for watching. If you are in the market for a very well-made AR, I highly recommend Militiaworks. Dane builds his rifles very well with very smart component selection, but maybe I'm a little bit biased. If you like this channel and want to see more videos, go ahead and subscribe, because that's how YouTube works. There's also a link in the video description to Subscribestar if you want to support me directly and get access to some bonus videos, bonus podcast stuff with Mr. Brassfax, and some Discord garbage. Anyway, see you guys next time.